the culture that you have and the skills. I mean, obviously, like I'm pretty sure like resourcefulness is super important, determination, teamwork,
Yep.
problem solving. These are all skills that you're going to need, I think, to really succeed at anything you do, period. But it's like for me, it was more about that finding something that I actually cared about getting better at, and then finding people that I wanted to do it with, and then having that common goal.
Jeff Adamson, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Tanvir.
I'm so excited. So quick introduction, founder of Neo Financial, previously the co-founder of one of the biggest and best and arguably the most successful startups in Canada, Skip the Dishes, and a 5-time national wrestling champion and a medalist at the Pan Am Games. It doesn't get any more real than this episode right here.
I feel like that's the best introduction I've ever written for you there, Tanvir.
Yeah. We'll go with that. But no, I'm so excited to have you on the show. And I mean, I think there's so many things we're going to dive into on the show. What are you up to nowadays? Just kick it off with that.
Sure. I'd say right now, maybe more on the personal side, wife and I just had our first child. So I've been pretty busy at home with that. And so I've realized, and maybe it's something we'll get into, but I thought that starting a company was really, really difficult. And then I got to see firsthand what my wife has to go through in the early days of, pregnancy, and then, childbirth, and then the early first 6 weeks. So my perspective of what is actually difficult has totally changed in the last 10 months now. He's now just turned 10 months. And then I'm Chief Merchant Officer and co-founder of Neo Financial, and so we're really building what I believe is really the first customer-centric bank in the last couple decades. The last time that anyone really started a new bank in Canada was back with ING Direct, I think in the 90s. And so we're building a bank from the ground up with a fully digital experience. With rewards that are 10x better than what people can get anywhere, and actually, and providing consumers with one of the highest interest rates on their savings accounts, and actually putting money back into the hands of Canadians. Right now, I think over 54% of Canadians are living paycheck to paycheck right now, and so we want to be able to maximize the value of Canadians' money and give them more for the money that they have, and also help by partnering up with retailers. So we're partnering up with thousands of retailers, giving them access to valuable data that they can use to help grow their business. And so it's early days right now. We got a small team. We've just ramped up to just around 100 people. So we ramped up pretty quickly, but it's still early days, and so there's lots of that figuring it out that we're doing right now.
Yeah, I'm sure you got great memories of the time that you're Skip the Dishes, of figuring it out and just ramping up. So I'm sure we'll dive into
or like PTSD is more likely.
I remember Lumsden was telling me on the podcast I did with him that you guys were literally out there running around putting stickers on the windows during the time of Skip the Dishes. That's how it was built from the ground up, which is tremendous.
Well, yeah, I mean that's I got I could bore you with thousands of stories like that, but we were bootstrapping. We couldn't raise any VC capital first 3 years of the company, and so we were just basically maxing out our credit cards, refinancing my house to basically be able to pay for, make payroll, and then you basically try to figure out how do you acquire customers, and you obviously can't have $100 customer acquisition costs. So we got this idea of what if we can really focus on creating value for the restaurants and help bring a new channel in for them, a new channel of revenue, and help them promote delivery as a kind of additional way that they can make money. And we're what if we just were to instead of buying a billboard, because we couldn't afford to do that, we're what if we put up mini billboards on every single one of our merchant partners? And I remember we started up in Saskatchewan, and the first winter that we had these stickers, we were basically going out in minus 45 degrees Celsius, literally minus 45.
Wow.
It was so cold, actually. You take the stickers out of your car, they'd immediately like shrivel
Shrink.
into, and you'd like pull them apart and then like try to put them on the wall, on a window outside, and they like
In the
chip
freezing
off.
cold.
And the owners, and I think maybe that's why like they stuck with us, but they would look at us and just be like, "Holy crap!" Like the founder of this company is literally outside
My store.
with bare hands putting up a sticker, and it's like they're like, "I've only ever gotten one order ever from Skip." So, but like I think
Oh,
that's
man.
like that's like most companies. I think you have to do those things that don't scale in the first few years until you get to the point where
Yeah.
you actually have the luxury of doing things at scale.
My question for you then is, where does that drive come from? Because there's a lot of people that like to start things, but I mean, refinance your house for payroll, going outside of minus 45 when you're the founder and CEO of a great startup, for having that kind of humility and that kind of drive, where did you find that? Was it experiences in your life? Was it sports? Just let's walk through that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously it's different for everyone, and I think I was pretty lucky. Like as a kid, my parents never really, protected me from doing difficult things, and
Yeah.
I think it was like always, whatever you have to do, you have to earn it. Like if you wanted to get a $5 allowance, you had to go out. Like I grew up in a small community south of Saskatoon,
Mhm.
maybe altogether maybe 100 people, and so we had a plot of land, and I'm not saying like I grew up like poor or anything like that. Like my parents were, I'd say, middle class. But if I wanted to like get a $5 allowance, I had to go out and spend like 4 or 5 hours mowing grass, watering trees. It was like really make your own fun. Earn whatever you
Earn it.
have. Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, I'm not to say like I don't think that's like crazy. I feel like that's kind of like everyone I knew grew up like that. So it wasn't like I thought that I was really hard off. And then of course I think as soon as you get involved in sports, you know that nothing is given to you.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
you don't get a gold medal or a trophy just because just wanted it. You have to put in the work. And so I think, that, and obviously I think sports were probably a big part of that because that was really what my focus was from a really young age. I think I started wrestling. I think I played hockey when I was 6, started wrestling, I think, when I was 6 or 7. And then, of course, I think like a lot of kids, you need to get put into a bunch of different sports.
Yeah.
Terrible at football. If we ever met at football, Tim, I feel like you would have just lit me up. Like I wouldn't have. But the thing is, you can't let me up when I'm just riding the bench anyway. So I don't think I would have ever.
Come on.
But
Did you play football at all, or was it always
I'm
hockey
not,
or wrestling?
again, not joking at all. Like
Uh,
I played football, but rode the bench. I
wow.
like. I remember in grade 9, I was so bad at football actually that the coach never even gave me pads. Like
You're
I
just
had,
redshirted.
and my coach was such a good recruiter. He was also the wrestling coach. He's like, come on, Jeff, come out and help the team. And I guess like helping the team, his definition of help, my definition of helping the team was like this vision of me like, running, like diving over the O line into the end zone,
Yeah.
getting a touchdown. His definition was like, Jeff, you just sit there and keep that bench toasty warm. Just keep it.
I guess some water.
Yeah. So anyway, I was so bad at it, and then next year I quit, and I was like, I'm not playing football.
No.
And then somehow he was able to recruit me to come back and play in grade
Wrestling.
11. No, in grade 11 I played
Football.
football again. I came back. I would just, and except for again, I just rode the bench again.
Bench.
Except for this time I got pads. Yeah, that
Nice.
time.
Nice. So you dressed up.
But yeah, back to your question. I think it was just, sports really ingrains that into you. If you like, that you have to earn it, you have to work for it, and I think the nice thing is that like you typically get out what you put in.
Yep.
And you can kind of see your progress, and I think once I had kind of gone through university, again, it's not like I was a brilliant student or anything, but I'd always kind of known that I had to save up. I had to like make sure that I was frugal so that I could put myself in a position that I could take some risks. And I think, a lot of students, they come out of university with a lot of debt, and some people have no choice, and that's really tough. But a lot of people do have a choice, and they kind of end up not really being smart with their money throughout college, and then as a result, they end up being in debt, and then you can't take these risks because, knowing that you've got $30,000, $40,000 of student loans hanging over you
pay,
after you got to get right into the workforce. And then it's like, well, I can't take a risk on starting my own company, because if it doesn't go right, then now I'm even further in debt and further behind. So I made sure to be extraordinarily frugal. My friends all made fun of me. I was known as the cheap guy. And when I got out of university, I was able to be in a position, I couldn't afford a home. Saskatoon had gone through a housing boom. Housing prices had tripled while I was at university. But I could afford to buy a piece of land. And so my brother and I actually bought a piece of land in a new development and built our own house with my father. We actually would evenings, weekends,
You actually built
go
your
out.
house.
Built it, yeah. Literally from scratch. I mean, I didn't do everything because some things you don't want me to touch. Like I didn't do the electrical, for example. I wouldn't be here if I did, but literally I'd be dead. But yeah, you do what you can do, and then you find out, okay, well, what can I afford to pay someone to do? And again, we lived in there for a little bit, and then we sold it, and then you're like, okay, now we have a little bit of capital to play around with, and okay, maybe now I can do. So if I hadn't have done that, if I hadn't saved enough to buy the lot, and if I hadn't have bought in the lot, then it wouldn't have been able to, and then I wouldn't have had that small nest egg that I could then use to say, well, now I can start a company and not pay myself for almost 3 years because I've saved up enough. And I can live on the floor. I can live on, I slept in my car. It was not a big deal for me because I didn't really need to live in a nice place. I just wanted to literally, if I had shelter, that was probably good enough. Wow. And that's kind of why I think in the beginning, the early days, I was able to kind of take those risks and put in some of that work.
I didn't know that, and that's such a powerful story. I think a lot of people just see, even when you look outside and you're like, okay, Skip the Dishes grew crazy, late 2016, 2017, 2018. It's but the years before that and how it started, it's so powerful. So it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's I was looking back actually because Skip released their Q3 earnings a couple of weeks ago, and they're going to do over $3 billion in sales. They're going to do probably close to 300,000 orders a day, probably. And I think those are actually conservative numbers. I think they're maybe sandbagging or something, but it's. I was looking back at emails, and there was an email from one of our co-founders and CEO, Josh Samer, and it was an email saying, he was like, hey, great week this week. We did $3,800 worth of business on 71 orders across the whole company.
Across the whole company. Wow.
And then, so I was like, I had these
you can't even compare.
Yeah, and it's
oh man.
But it's not necessarily, so the early days, I think people often romanticize about the early days and stuff, but it's not like it's any easier now, because there's I can't remember who said it, but they're like, this is a Tour de France champion, and they were asking him about how hard is it, doing these impossible legs of the Tour de France where you're climbing up, 50,000 feet in over 300K in a day. And he's like, it's no harder than it was the first time I ever rode a bike. The only difference is I just go faster now. And so it's the difficulty doesn't change.
It doesn't change.
Just the scale changes.
Yeah. You still got to put in the work, right? Day in, day out.
Yeah. Well, all about, I mean, you worked at RBI, and so you've obviously probably, that wasn't a very small company to work at. What was it like for you, going from maybe working at a smaller company, then going and working at RBI and just seeing how many liters of coffee are poured a second at Tim Hortons?
It's crazy. There's something I don't know how many million cups a day.
Millions of cups a day?
Yeah, something like that. I remember I forget the number now, but
is it like a Niagara Falls? Basically the equivalent?
Yeah. I mean the culture though, right? It's no matter how great we do, and it kind of goes back to this is why I love having folks like you on the podcast. It kind of goes back to training camp and football, where no matter how well you did before, the next year you're starting from scratch, and somebody else is going to come in and compete for your position, even if you had a killer year the year before, right? So I think in my time or in startups, it's the same thing. At RBI was great, we had these great results, but let's go back to 0-0, work your ass off again, and we got to beat these results, right? So I think having that ingrained, my drive came from sports, kind of how yours came from the early life as well, right? So yeah, it's very similar.
Yeah, I think Unfortunately, I think and again, like I want to put a heavy disclaimer on everything that I'm saying, that like, I'm not saying that like anyone should go out and do what I've done. And I'll be the first to say that like what I've done could have been done better by someone else too, and it's like we made so many mistakes along the way, probably like classic mistakes that you're just like, it's a total, and of course, like we couldn't have done what we did without all the incredible people that we met along the way. And you're one of them that we met. I remember when we met at Tim Hortons,
Yep.
and I think I was wandering around like a tourist, just being like, oh my God, like taking photos and like I'm gonna
I
send this to my
remember.
mom.
I remember. We're like, hey Jeff, yeah, let's show you around.
So actually, so you probably don't know this, but so we threw so many Hail Marys to sign up Tim Hortons. Um, I literally, like, I'm surprised that the police didn't call me for stalking Sami Siddiqui, who I think at the time he was the president of Tim Hortons. But basically, I had emailed him, LinkedIn him, carrier pigeons were coming over to drop off messages from me. I even had a classmate from Harvard I hunted down, who was like a friend of one of our investors. I got him to like go through the Harvard connection,
Connections, yeah.
email him. That didn't work. Then basically I like pooled together enough money. We bought sorry, before that we started sending deliveries to his office. So we started sending him like pastries from local
Cuba
bakeries,
dishes, yeah.
like from like couriers to the office, addressed to him. That didn't work. Then we actually bought a billboard. We tried to figure out where his office was, and then we pulled together enough money between a few of us and bought a billboard that we figured could be seen from his office, so that he would kind of be like, "Oh wow, like this Skip the Dishes is blowing
It's
up."
going up. Wow. That's
Uh,
remarkable. That's remarkable.
but like, I mean, why not though? I mean, if you think
Yeah.
about it, if you think about when you're playing football, and you know, if it's halftime and you're down 30 points, I mean, are you just gonna like
Gonna just give up? No. Yeah.
you're gonna
How
look
do
at
you?
every single different play? Like you're like, even when it's 30 points and you only got 1 minute left, like you're still throwing the
They're gonna.
ball. Like
Yeah.
I think I'm assuming you would. I know nothing about
Absolutely.
football. I was terrible at it, but yeah.
How do you? I mean, how do you know? So that's a great point, right? Like, how do you know how hard to try after something, and when do you know to call it quits?
I'm a terrible guy to ask about that because
Keep
I'm
going.
terrible at I'm terrible at quitting. Um, but I always do read that stuff where they're like, you know, you have to quit your way to success. I think there's a lot of people who I've seen that where they're like, tried this, didn't work, didn't work, and then finally they found their thing that worked. And I think to me, like maybe when other people can convince you that you should quit, then it's probably a good time.
Got it.
And I think that, I think when I think back to my career in wrestling, like I think I retired before people were like, hey man, you should probably think about hanging up the boots. And I don't think wasn't at that point yet, but I kind of had other things I wanted to do. And then, but you do see people who you're like, man, you're like 35 years old, 40 years old, still in the sport. Like you haven't had a performance as you were better 10 years ago than you were now. Like, but if you still have that fire in you and you still love it, then you're kind of just doing it because you love it. Maybe you're not doing it because
Yeah.
you're going to make the Olympics anymore. You're just doing it because you love it. And so I think with a business or anything, like if people are kind of starting to say like, hey man, like you're living in a shack, you're homeless, things are really working out. Maybe you should think about going back and getting a day job. I think that's the point where they're like, okay, they're either going to convince you that it's hopeless for you to continue, or you can, convince them and yourself that you actually like you're going to make it, or that you
Yeah.
just love it enough that you don't care. You're like, actually, I'm okay living like this.
Yeah.
I'm doing something that I love to do. But it's so individual. So I think for every
Exactly.
person it's different. But I think that's kind of how I see it, at least.
Or it's like almost like when somebody tells you it's time to quit, it almost lights a fire under you. In some cases, at least for me, it's like, hey, every time somebody's like, yeah, you know what? Either I get rejected or somebody's like, you're not gonna make it. It almost like, well, now I have to try,
Oh,
right?
it is just
That's the motivation.
it's just another big old log on the fire, you know?
Yeah.
it is actually, it is actually motivational in some way. I remember we were like, I think it was the first year or two at Skip, we were still kind of chase after shiny things. You see something and you're like, oh, we
Yep.
should go do that, or we should go do that. And instead of just kind of like sticking to your core. And one of those shiny things was this business contest at the University of Saskatchewan. And it was like the top prize was, I think, 50 grand. And you basically had, it was a pitch contest. I'm sure you've seen these, they're
Yep.
popular. And we had made it to the finals, and we'd like, our teams were kind of spread out across Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and we all came to Saskatoon for this final pitch contest, and it was, us against um, a company claiming they could turn kind of crude oil into water, and then there was another one that was, it was literally a hammock for a horse, but like for performing surgery on the horse. It was like a $200,000 hammock. And I was like, okay, we've got this in the bag. My whole family was there and everything. We spent all day prepping for it, and 50 grand is a lot of money. Like we needed
Yep.
that money big time. And we get up there, crush the presentation. The other teams totally flopped, and I'm like, okay, this is in the bag. I'm like basically on like Amazon pre-ordering stuff because I
Good
feel like
stuff.
I'm rich now. And sure enough, we ended up losing. Got second place in a business contest at the U of S, and literally my one of the co-founders, Josh, taps him on the shoulder, shows me a press release. DoorDash raises $17 million from Sequoia Capital. The prize we got, a $5,000 gift certificate to Deloitte. And so,
That
but
must
then,
have stung.
but then I
Yeah.
remember I can't remember if I said it or he said it. He just said, "We just got to prove him wrong. We just got to prove him wrong."
Look, I mean, look what happened after that, and it's like, and I think that's another point, because when somebody else judges you, if you guys had said, you know what, we came second and actually believed that result and gave up, then this wouldn't be here, right?
Yeah, I think when you start believing that, then I think you're probably in the wrong
Already lost.
career or something. Yeah, you have already lost. I
Yeah.
think it's
Yeah.
your point about when do you call it quits. I think it's like when other people are starting to convince you that it's time to quit, then you should definitely quit. Because if you don't believe, there's just no way that you're going to be able to do it.
Exactly.
It's probably nothing worse than getting up and working towards something that you don't believe in. That sounds like
Yeah.
torture to me.
Yeah. Exactly. U of S. That's where you went to university, right?
Yeah.
So you had wrestling there for 4 years. So walk me through that career path.
Yeah, so I went to university, like my parents, like my dad never went to college. He was a firefighter. My mom did kind of worked a part-time job at a university, at the hospital. Um, but it wasn't like she took a kind of a lower paying path. Um, and so for me, like I felt a lot of pressure to go to university. It was kind of like that's just what you do. Like you're going to go to school, you're going to get a degree, and then you're
Yep.
going to work that job for 50 years, and then you're going to retire, and then you're going to die. That's that's it. And I think like a lot of people, like I didn't really have any clue what I was going to do, so I just went into kind of open general studies. Because the only reason I was going to college was really because my parents told me I should, and then because I wanted to compete.
Wrestling.
I wanted to wrestle. And so I went to the university, and it's a pretty steep jump. I don't know if it's the same in football or not, but going from like high school to college in wrestling is a big jump because in high school you're wrestling in,
competing against seniors, right? Or it's by weight.
yeah, I mean you can compete against a guy 30 years old, and there's a big difference between an 18-year-old and a 30-year-old.
Yeah.
And an 18-year-old does not have the advantage. The 30-year-old old man strength. So I remember just like getting my butt whooped hard in the first 6 months, maybe a little bit less than that, and because you have all these guys that have been in university competing for 3-4 years,
Yeah.
and then we had like our senior team, so they may even be out of university, but they're still around the room training, maybe to make the Olympics or Pan Am Games teams.
Yep.
And so you're just coming in as this, I couldn't even grow facial hair at the time, and it was like, I think there's a lot of sports where if you can lose at it, like a race, for example, like the guy finished the race before I did, and that sucks. but you don't feel like physically beaten down mentally, emotionally the same way that you do in a combative sport. Combat sport, it's a different feeling. Like you're like getting,
yeah,
you're getting beaten down, and and it's also like, and I played hockey and football too, and it's different because you're in the team, and so you can get lit up hard.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sucks because it hurts, but it's different than having someone across from you who is just trying to beat you down.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think a lot of people don't really understand about combat sports. So the good thing though is that you don't want to stay in that situation for very long, because losing all the time is pretty painful physically and mentally, emotionally. And so the urge and that drive to get better was super, super strong. And so I was able to kind of catch up pretty quick to the rest of the group.
How do you do that? What did you do specifically during those 6 months?
I was obsessed, absolutely obsessed with catching up to the rest of the crew that was beating me up, because, and I don't, it wasn't like an ego thing necessarily. It was just, I just wanted to get better badly. And if I wasn't on the mat, I was watching tape. If I wasn't watching tape, I was in the weight room. If I wasn't in the weight room, I was in class. And literally, I would be so bored in class, and I would be falling asleep. But to keep myself awake, I would think of what happened at practice the day before.
Mm-hmm.
And I would replay in my mind all the situations, the positions where I got outmaneuvered, where a guy overpowered me. Why did I lose that match? Why didn't that technique work? And I could literally feel my heart rate increase while I was
sitting in class.
In class, going through it in my mind, and that would keep me awake in school. And it was so, like, even if I was only going to practice, you do a 2.5 hour, 3 hour practice, 2 hours in the weight room in the morning, maybe. But then I was probably spending 5 or 6 hours a day going through everything that happened. And so I think, yeah, so it was like, maybe everyone was putting in 2-3 hours a day, and I was putting in probably 10 to 12, but mentally. And I think that helped. And then I just gave a damn too. I think, caring a lot, I think, can really get you pretty far too.
It's surprising how half the people, like your teammates, there's teammates across, or teams that I faced, you can tell the people that care and the people that don't. Like, sometimes I'd be surprised after you lose a game, how some guys could just laugh and be okay with it and just go on with their life. I'm like, how can you do that? Like, I don't like it. For me, I was like, holy shit, we lost a game. Let's go see what the hell happened, what went wrong, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy how the divide you see.
Well, the same thing in companies too. I think that's, when you look at, and maybe we'll get into this, but it's like, for me, so I did my 4 years in university and got my degree, and then I went into, I ended up transitioning over to sciences. I got a degree in biotechnology. So I kind of focused on, I really kind of was really excited about this whole kind of biotech, genetic engineering of plants, and like how do you grow more food for the world in harsh climates, or new varieties that can yield twice as much, and help solve some of these big problems that we have kind of globally. Unfortunately, what I didn't really understand was that, like, in order to basically produce those and get the results that you want to do the genetic modification, all that stuff, it's a ton of lab work. And what I didn't realize is I did not have the patience, the skill, all of it, to be good in the lab. And so I ended up I did field research, sucked at it, was super miserable. I was a terrible, terrible employee. Like, and I was a classic, oh, this company is terrible. It's a great company. Yeah. I was terrible. I was just too much of a little, a little bitch.
Yeah.
No, but I was a bitch about it, and I was too young and inexperienced in my career to realize that it wasn't the company's fault. I was the problem. It was a bad fit for me.
Wow.
And then I eventually went and moved into from field research to doing lab research. Again, still wasn't good at it. Unfortunately, that company ended up going out of business, and I ended up getting into kind of sales and marketing, and that's when I realized like, oh my, okay, this is something that yeah, I was like, okay, this is like, I was shocked that I would get paid to do it. That's how much I loved it.
That's amazing. Wow. That's where your whole entrepreneurship started, right? From that point onwards.
I think that was in 2009, 2010. And I think that's, yeah, that was the first time I'd really kind of realized that like the whole, like getting into like the whole world of business and understanding that like there was a way that you could apply all the things that you had learned in sport to the world of business. I actually had no idea that that was possible because doing research, I don't know, I could not figure out how to apply what, my abilities
in the lab.
During just doing research. I just couldn't do it. I wasn't able to. So once I got into the business world, then I realized that this is where you can apply a lot of the skills that you've learned because it's, it's competitive, it's about teamwork. It's about having like these strong characteristics that like you can put in more and get more out. I was able to figure that, and I also was just shocked that the bar was so much different between kind of the world of sports and the like you go from this environment where every single person is super fired up and dialed in to be the best that they can possibly be
in sport, yeah.
And then you go into the workforce and people are like, okay, 5:00, let's go home.
I'm done. Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah, like, oh, we lost that deal. Like to your point earlier about like you lose a game. Same thing in the workforce. Like people are like, oh, we didn't get that deal, or oh, that can wait till tomorrow, or oh, the company's not really doing that well. It's like that was a shock to me. I was blown away because I could not imagine being like living, or I couldn't imagine doing something for more than 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week that you didn't care a ton about. So yeah,
it's like the first time I had the realization was when I was my first job. There was earnings call, and in the morning, and I dialed into the earnings call, right, 8 a.m. and I'm sitting there and I'm like all fired up, ready with my notepad, and I look around and I'm like, people are just walking around. Nobody else is on this call. I'm like, guys, this is the results, right? People are like, what call are you even on? Half of them didn't even know we had an earnings call that morning. So that was my first realization of to your point, differences in the bar between sports and how I think some people just don't care.
But I think that, I mean, and obviously like you and I both were huge into sports, and I think actually football is a great sport because yours is way more team focused actually. And like, have you noticed that from your side, like that?
Yeah.
Having worked within a team, and then you could just translate that into business. Has that been something that you've been able to do?
Yeah, like I think one of the biggest things that I get feedback on from my teams is like the aspect of the teamwork, is like how working with different personalities. And I mean, and I didn't realize this until I think a few years ago. Is like people are like, you're really good at dealing with people that would rub you the wrong way, or you have a thick skin, or you're able to go and convince people that I just can't get a hold of, or they're emailing back and forth. And when I started looking back, I'm like, I didn't take any courses on this. The course was the 5 years in university dealing with 80 people on one team for 40 hours a week for 5 years, right? So it was like, it's that exact same principle. It's like, okay, you don't like someone? Well, doesn't matter. You got to win the game. You got to win it together, right? So stop being a kid about it.
Yeah. Do you find that it's kind of like an attitude of, well, what do you care more about? Do you care more about, does this person like me, or do I like them, or do I care more about us being a winning team?
And that exactly comes back to the point you made earlier. It's like you then applied all these principles you learned in wrestling into business because you cared about the bigger goal versus the ego, or I like you or I don't like you, right? That's exactly it.
But I think we also need to be careful though that, because we're talking about sports, we both played sports, that we're not having this attitude that like, oh, like somehow athletes are better than other people. And because I've met artists, musicians, people, and those guys and girls are super passionate and dialed in and high performance.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I mean, I don't have an artistic or creative bone in my body, but you know, those people who dedicate themselves to that craft. I think so. It really comes down to just any craft.
And any craft, right? And in the full disclosure, like I think there's a lot of people that when played football or even in the pros that I know who are just dicks, and you put them. It's like they did it because they were forced to do it. The moment their careers ended, they just went into some sort of I don't know what you want to call it, but like they stopped caring, don't maintain themselves,
Yeah.
don't care about people, don't care about anything in the world, are not good people. And I've seen a ton of those people that were athletes as well. So I think it's about being passionate about what you do, that some athletes have. Again, yeah, full disclosure, just want to make sure that's clear, as you said.
Yeah. No, totally. And I think that's, and even from us, I think there's a bit of an echo chamber we can create, you know, and like, so we've got Jesse Lumsden on our team. We've got
Yep.
Barrett Martineau, who is 2018. So obviously like Lumsden is like a legend in bobsled, went to 3 Olympics.
Yep.
He also, you know, played football in the CFL. And then Barrett Martineau, he was skeleton in 2018 Olympics in Korea. There's another guy with us named Adam. He went to the 2016 games in field hockey. But we don't want to create a culture where it's like, oh, we all think the same and it's a bunch of guys or girls banging their chests, and you're like, because you need to have that diversity of thinking.
Absolutely.
In order for someone to be like, hey Jeff, maybe bulldozing this wall isn't the right. Maybe we should like build a rope, or maybe we should go around it or tunnel under it. And and so I think it's just kind of finding people who just really care about being the best at whatever it is that they love, and have put in the work.
And finding people, I always say I always hire people with passion and fit, and put the thing where you have a lot more future looking outcomes versus what you've done in the past, right? So it's like, yeah, you can find somebody with a ton of experience, but find somebody that fits the culture, that fits the drive, and has that hunger and humbleness and is hardworking, the 3 H's. So I think, and you can find that anywhere, really. Somebody could have been an athlete, or you could have been in some sort of an experience in life where you got that from, right? So
have you found another, like, outside of sports, because that's like an obvious one that we know, but like, have you found another, you know, category of people where it's like, man, like it seems like every single musician that I've hired has been so good. Like I've had such good luck with them, or singers or artists. Or have you found any other group that you've really clicked with?
I wouldn't say I found a group. I think what I've seen work really well are people that kind of did not have something handed to them on a golden plate, but were super diligent, or working their asses off in roles where you know that they're a lot more talented than what they're doing. So I think having the ability as a leader to find those people and give them the responsibility and take a chance on them is something that I've seen work really well for people that I've seen others, as well as some things that I've done. So I would say that that's something that I've seen, and maybe there's others, but in my experience, that's definitely something that's like, you know, somebody wants to win, like I'll train you, but you bring the drive, and I can bring the drive for you. If you have the drive, let's go. Right.
Yeah, I remember my mentor, I was like, hey, what's your key to motivating people? And he said, I don't hire unmotivated people.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's a cheat of an answer, but it's true.
You mentioned something about, so you applied your skills from wrestling into the business, right? And then you said that you found that you putting more in, getting more out of business. Could you dive a little bit more in there? Because as you said, the bar is a lot lower. So for all the entrepreneurs out there, all the folks who are trying to build a career, what is it that they should be inputting and getting out more? Because to your point, if you do the process, the drills, you're gonna win. So what is that?
Yeah, and so I think it's obviously like in heavy disclaimer that like I can only kind of think or speak from my own experience, and God knows it could be different, because I always you always hear about, oh, like Google does this, and like Steve Jobs was like that, and it's like, yeah, well, that worked for that context and what they were going through and what they needed to do at the time. Nowadays, a lot of people, they start companies and they're able to raise tons of money out of the gate. And for us, like, we had to bootstrap for years, and so we had to do a lot of things that are kind of probably pretty dumb, because it's like, well, there's probably a better way to do it. It just would cost a little bit more. So for me, like the couple things that skills is a very broad term to apply skills from sports to business, but it was like, for me, what I wanted was to be able to replicate the conditions that I had as an athlete in the business world as much as possible. And what I find when I talk to a lot of people who have gone through from high performance athletes to the real world, we call it, like starting your real life, is they go from like, what do they call it? Like they go from like the pinnacle to the outhouse, basically.
Yeah.
The Olympics to the outhouse. And it's like you go from like, usually most people go out on a high, like at the best that they have been, and then they just basically go down to the dumps, and they're just like, now you go and work a job and you're kind of a nobody, really. I mean, people will be like, oh wow, like look at that guy over there, he's the Vanier Cup champion. Yeah. Like, you know, and that's like emotionally really, really tough, I think. And so, but it's not just that they go into being like a nobody, but it's also you go into this world where everyone cares a whole bunch about winning, everyone's aligned, everyone's trying to be their best, to a workplace where that isn't what the case is. People don't really care as much, unfortunately, at most companies. They kind of clock in and clock out, and they're kind of working for the weekend. I mean, the whole TGIF thing is kind of a statement towards like, yeah, it's like, well, what's the hell is the point of putting 40 hours a week minimum towards something that if you're actually looking forward to not having to do it? So for me, I was trying to think, okay, how do I find an industry, an area of business where I enjoy the process of mastery, right? Like where I'm going to enjoy the process of getting better at it. I'm not necessarily going to be very good at it right now, but I know that I'm going to enjoy getting better, and that eventually I will love it, because if I continue to enjoy getting better at it, eventually I can be the best at it. And being the best at something is really fun. Winning is really, really fun.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I was looking at. And I was lucky because I was stuck in the wrong career, like a lot of people. The company I was working for ran out of funding, and I was laid off, and I fell into a career in sales and marketing. And working around people and working with people, I got a lot of satisfaction and enjoyed the process of getting better at that. I'm still learning and trying to get better at it. And then number two is like, try to find people who you enjoy being around and who are aligned with you around a common goal. And I think there's a lot of people who are working in jobs where they don't know if they're winning or losing. They have people working against them actively in a company, where it's like, how miserable are you going to be not even knowing if the person next to you has your back? And so like, find a team of people who like that you can go to war with, you can be in the trenches elbow to elbow with. And there's something that occurs between people that go through incredible challenges together. I don't know what it is, if it's like some sort of energy or something.
It's something, right?
Yeah, and like, it because you went through it with your football team. I know it because of wrestling, and then also through Skip. But like, we went through hell. We went through absolute hell. Like, I'm talking, like, imagine you've got 3, 4, 30,000 orders out on the roads, and the website crashes, and then not even a single one of those couriers knows where to deliver the order. You have to call them all and manually tell them where to deliver the order. And then all of your engineers at home, hey guys, like, I don't care if it's Christmas, I don't care if you're with your family, I don't care if you're on a first date, you're opening up your laptop and you got to fix it. And then it sounds miserable, but at the same time, all of a sudden you look, those are the moments that people remember. like when you're reminiscing, like those are everyone who went through this with us, they think back about this time and they're like, oh man, I can't believe we pulled that off, you know. Whereas now, like a lot of companies are like, no, 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 like, we got to respect their boundaries. We got to like protect them from the company.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the case. So like, because and so those aren't really skills, Tanvir. I'm avoiding your question, but I think what I'm trying to say
This
is
is
like
perfect.
it could be any skill. Like quite frankly, like I think as long as for me that it's the environment,
Mm-hmm.
now the culture that you have and the skills. I mean, obviously, like I'm pretty sure like resourcefulness is super important, determination, teamwork,
Yeah.
you know, problem solving. These are all skills that you're going to need, I think, to really succeed at anything you do, period. But it's like for me, it was more about that finding something that I actually cared about getting better at, and then finding people that I wanted to do it with, and then having that common goal to work
Amazing.
towards. That, and that's easier said than done. I think it's pretty rare that I find a company where everyone is unified towards one goal and everyone's got each other's backs. When you see it though, it's magical.
It is. I mean, you live for the moment, right? I think you've been through that, so it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean it's and we're going through it again right now. I mean
Yeah.
at Neo, we've got like we're going up against probably the most defensible businesses in Canada and the most entrenched, the most protected by both, you know, defensive moats and the government. In an industry that's typically kind of shunned technology, with the kind of belief that people in Canada deserve better. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that Canadians should live in a state of debt hopelessness. I think there's a lot of Canadians that are excluded from the financial system that need help. And I think there's a lot of businesses in Canada that are being left out of this information revolution that's going on. You know, like owning a corner, you know, coffee shop or, you
Yeah.
know, a mom and pop shop on the corner. You know, nowadays someone's going to come in with data, with technology, with frictionless experiences, and they're going to blow them out of the water. So someone's got to figure out how do we elevate the entire, you know, Canadian retail system up to
Yeah.
where it needs to be from a tech perspective, and at the same time on the customer side provide the Canadians with a way of
Yep.
stretching their dollar and getting more for their money. And obviously, like it is a grind every day. Like we are in the trenches right now.
Well, I'm happy you took an hour out for the podcast. I'm very privileged to have you on the show out of your busy time.
No, and Tanvir, I'm glad that you're doing this, and you know what, I appreciate you and what you're doing, and I think that you know, I think a lot of people we all consume content, but I think it's we have to give back and
Yep.
share these stories because you know if one person listens to what you're doing and other people that you bring on your show and they say, hey, you know what, maybe I'm gonna take a bit of a risk and start something, and who
Yep.
knows what that could turn into, and again for anyone listening too, like I'm not at all going to prescribe that people go and do exactly what I'm doing, but maybe there's one like something in there, whatever it may be, and maybe that could lead to something. So I'm just glad that you're doing it, man.
Well, thank you, man. Appreciate it. Last message, quick 2 or 3 points. Somebody looking to build an amazing career, start an entrepreneurship, whatever it is, what's one piece of advice you'd like to give before we end the show?
Well, one piece of advice, I think it would be like find a team. You know, I feel like a lot of people they really think it's about going it alone, and I've been really lucky and super grateful that I was able to have a team of people
Yep.
that I was able to learn a ton from. You know, and that's Josh, Chris, Dan Samir, Andrew Chow. These are the co-founders of Skip. You know, I'm super grateful that I'm building Neo with Chris and Andrew, who are joining us in building Neo, and so that you know I could never. I certainly it would be impossible to imagine Skip without those guys, and of course all the early employees that that believed in our mission. And so like that to me is like if you've got a great team of people, like you'll find an idea. Like you will find an idea, and between the a few of you, you'll be able to kind of strengthen that idea and get rid of the bad ones and finally come up with something that you're like, all three, four, two of you, whatever it is that you're like, this is worth us putting everything else we could be doing in our lives on hold in order to pursue. And once you've got to that point, then your odds, I think, of it succeeding are much, much higher than if you're just like, hey, I want to build this thing and I'm going to do it on my own. And, I think that's tough. I don't think I'd even enjoy doing that, to be honest.
Yeah. Awesome. Build a good team, find the process, bring the drive.
Yeah, you're probably way better at the process stuff than I am, the engineering background.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff. For everybody listening, you can follow Jeff, LinkedIn, Twitter, and check out Neo Financial. What's the website, Jeff?
Yeah, so neofinancial.com. I think, best thing to check it out. We've got for Eastern Canada, we had a lot of demand, so we actually created a wait list. So we have a 1.7% interest rate on savings account that people are like flooding in to get. Western Canada, we're live across BC, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan's coming really, really soon. And so they can actually get Neo right away. They can start getting rewards. They can open up a bank account.
Beautiful.
But hey, appreciate you, Tanvir. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Team, remember to like, subscribe, and share with a friend, and visit tanvirvango.com for a ton of free content and exercises.